Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Integrating ServiceNow with the Itential Automation Platform. My name is Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer, and I'll be your host and guide today as we demonstrate just how to do this in our platform. So in this demo today, we're going to be utilizing the Itential Automation Platform along with ServiceNow. So that'll be the focus of everything we do today. But we're also leveraging Automation Gateway to communicate with a Cisco device. We've spent other webinars talking about the different pieces and parts of our platform and how they work. For today, it's just understood that Automation Gateway gives us access to this particular device for this demonstration. But since this is purely focused on ServiceNow and integration and how to build automations that utilize ServiceNow, we're really going to focus on that piece of it. So some of the things that you'll learn today are how to easily integrate ServiceNow with the Itential Automation Platform. I'll show you how to integrate our platform with ServiceNow, kind of as that foundational step to get started. How to build an automation workflow that goes from ticket creation to ticket closure. We'll also learn how to use transformations to transform data within automation tasks for ServiceNow, forms, which we'll look at too, or any other data source or source of truth. And then we'll also look at how to build automations that coordinate with ServiceNow's approval process. And this is one of a series of Itential and ServiceNow webinars that we have coming up. So we're going to start with the basics, but they're very powerful and very useful as a foundational step. And then as we continue down this series, we'll get to more and more advanced things, and I'll start pointing out where those things lie as we start building out this demo here in a few minutes. And then finally, when we finish this demonstration, we're going to end up with an automation that get started from some form input. So user input from a form that's a feature of our platform. We're going to use a feature called a transformation to transform that data. We'll talk a little bit more about that and how it works and why it's so powerful. We're going to be able to open and update ServiceNow tickets, especially with the updating piece of it, adding more information as more data about the work or the proposed work gets populated and known. Then we're going to actually do the networking change, verify that, and then close the ticket out. So with that, let me shift over to sharing my screen. All right. One moment, please. All right. So what we're looking at now is the main dashboard for the Itential Automation Platform. So before we can do anything with ServiceNow, we have to be able to onboard an integration with ServiceNow so that Itential has connectivity to our ServiceNow platform. And so let me show you very quickly what that looks like. We can go into Admin Essentials, which allows us to administrate the platform itself. And we have a couple of ways to do this. We actually have a very robust library of pre-builts, and part of the pre-built library that we have, they're freely available for our customers. They can download any of those into the platform. And some of those pre-builts include adapters, and adapters are just what they're called. They adapt. Think of them as a way of integrating pre-built integrations that we have provided to all kinds of different IT systems. It's an ever-growing library of adapters, ServiceNow being one of them. However, we also have the ability to do an integration. Integration gives the power to generate essentially an adapter to our end user. So they don't have to wait for us to generate as the vendor to generate an integration with an IT system or network controller. As long as that particular vendor of that system or that controller or whatever it may be can publish a document around the specifications around their API. So it could be Open API spec, it could be Swagger, it could be Postman collection. We can consume that and create an integration that allows you to now go ahead and start using that system directly in your automations. And that's what we'll show today. So the first thing we would do is we would gather that data that we have an Open API spec that we're going to use for ServiceNow, and I can click the import and I can create an integration model. And from literally here, it's drag and drop for for our API integration file. And now it's read the platform has read the model from the JSON file, which is the Open API spec. I can validate it. It's going to validate that the integration JSON model is valid. And then from here, I can import it in. Now that's the first step. So it's created a model, and from that model, it defines all of the endpoints for the API that are available to us. But since this is a model, we actually have to do an implementation of this model, and that's where we go into the integration. So if I create an integration, I can select this ServiceNow model, give it a name, save it, and it'll create this integration. And then from the integration, it's going to ask us some authentication properties. And so we can fill those out according to the what we have in our development lab here. And then from there, save it. And once that's created, now we've instantiated the integration model. It will connect to the ServiceNow instance, and then all of the endpoints that were defined in that API spec now become available for us to use within the automation platform, specifically within the Automation Studio. So let's move over there as our next point. So when we go to the Automation Studio, this is our drag and drop canvas where we can build automations. Now, I'm going to flip the script a bit. If you've tuned into any of our previous webinars where we've done a demo, typically what we do is we start with something network centric, since we are a network automation platform. So we'll do something around the network, and then we'll layer in things like integrating a source of truth or integrating within the workflow and the automation, something with ServiceNow. I'm going to flip the script. I want to start only with ServiceNow. And the three main things that we want to hit, at least in this initial piece, is opening a ServiceNow ticket, updating a ServiceNow ticket, and then closing a ServiceNow ticket. So let's start our automation with that. We're not going to touch any networking whatsoever until we finish those three tasks and we understand how all that works. So from here, I can create a new workflow. I'm going to create a workflow and give it a name. All right. And so we're essentially starting with a blank canvas here. And so let's think this through for a moment. So the first step we want to do is we want to learn how to create a ServiceNow change request ticket. That's the first thing we want to do. And so how do we do that? We start with this task here, a node or a task, and we want to define what this node or task is. So recall when we created that integration model for ServiceNow, it's going to expose all the API endpoints, and they literally become drag and drop elements that we can use as a step or a task in our workflow. So if I go here, I can explore all my options, and I can see these tasks that are available to me, and we can narrow it down to seeing what's ServiceNow related. And so we've got several ServiceNow instances here, or yeah, two instances here. They're offering us all of the API calls into the ServiceNow adapter or integration that we've created. And so since the first step we want to make is change request, we're going to select this one, create change request. Of course, there's lots of others. We're going to use just a few. Well, actually, we're just going to use two in this demonstration. Create and update, but we're going to start with change request, create change request. And the first thing I like to do when I create something like this is change the name so that I can understand its function in here. We give it some kind of default names based off of what the task is, but this should be, create ServiceNow change request. Now, in order to create that ServiceNow change request, every single task, it's helpful to think of it in terms of, does this particular task require some sort of data to be input into it? And then once a task is run, and this is an API call, once this is run, there should be some amount of data that comes out of it. And this is a perfect example of that. So if I go to create ServiceNow and I click on variables over here, this is specific to this um, the ServiceNow task. It's asking me two variables. One is the adapter, which is already defined for ServiceNow, but it's asking me for a body. And in this case, really what it wants is it wants a what's called a JSON object that's defining the variables that get passed to the ServiceNow system in order to create an IT ticket. So we have to give it a JSON object, and this is where it helps to invest a little bit of time to understand JSON objects, JSON schemas, because that's kind of the heart of what we do. Everything, all the data that we use within the Itential platform is put into or manipulated through or lives in a JSON object, and it's not really that difficult, especially if you've got some programming background. But it doesn't require a lot of programming background to understand that it's just a format. It's just a text format that defines things. And the one thing I want us to define here, there's one bit of data, is we want to define a variable called summary that we're going to pass to ServiceNow in order to create this ticket. And then we're just going to give it a value, um, new network change. That's it. That is the only piece of data and it's basically a string. And if you want to think of this particular object as a very simplified thing, it's a key called summary, or a variable called summary. I'm defining it to be set, this particular string to be set to new network change. And we're going to see how that maps into ServiceNow in a minute. So let me save that and let's just run that. So if I start this this very straightforward and simple workflow, we're going to be able to take a look at it while it's running in what's called Job Manager. So the first step, which is the only step, has been completed. Now, what's useful here is if I click on this, I can actually see the data that is coming in, that we're passing into this particular step, and the data that gets passed out of the step. So think of it this way. This is why I say if you think about every task in a workflow or every step in a workflow, think about data going in that it needs, and then the response data that comes out. So what we're doing is we're making a call into the ServiceNow system, giving it a variable called summary, and defining it to be called new network change. And then on the outgoing, this is what the ServiceNow system passed back to us as a response. So as a response, a couple of things we'll notice here. We see this ID. This is the unique ID of the new change request that was created. But here's the human readable version of it. 265 is what it ends in. This is good for us to understand. And you can see it has responded back with a lot of information. And some of this we'll use and some of it we won't. But we'll see how we can use this here in a moment. So let me go back so recall 30265 is our new ticket. If I go into ServiceNow, I update this, we'll see 30265. That's the ticket that was just created by that one step. And you'll notice here that summary that we passed to it is now mapped to the short description, and it set the short description to new network change. So that's what we set it to in that one task in the workflow. All right, that's pretty cool. But there's a lot of things that haven't been set here that probably ought to be set. So if this is a new network change, this category probably shouldn't be other. It should be set to network. So our next step could be to update the ticket with some new information, and we'll keep it simple. We'll just update that category so that it is set to network. Again, we're going to take this simple in steps. Here's a really cool tip, and I'm going to show this later. But in ServiceNow, not every application is like that. But in ServiceNow, if you right-click on a label here and you can show choice list, you can actually see we're interested in the change request. This element category is something we can pass in our update task in a moment. And these are the things we can set it. The values are the things we can set it to. So we're actually going to update this ticket and set the category to network. And these are the other valid categories we could set it to. So that gives us a hint. All of this data can be found in the API documentation on ServiceNow's website, but it's always nice when the application itself gives you the ability to kind of see some of these things while you're building your automations and workflows. Okay, so let's go back and this here. And now let's go back to our workflow. And now let's add another step. So we've created that successfully. So let's insert a new node and let's do an update, because now we want to update this and change the category to networking. So once you start using the platform and building automations, we keep a list of commonly used tasks, so I don't have to go to the all options. Although I could do a search for here for update change request. But that was one of the features or the functions that was available to us from the ServiceNow adapter. Update the change request. And again, one of the first things I like to do here is change the summary name of it to update ServiceNow change request. All right. So let's take a look at the variables. So remember, tasks need data coming in and they'll have data coming out. So the variables here will define the information that needs to come in to this update ServiceNow request that we're going to use as the next step. And you'll see here, very similar to the first one where we have a body that we're going to pass some information to it. But we also have a new variable that needs to be set, and this is the change ID. So when we create a ServiceNow request, initially, there's not a pre-existing ticket that was created. So at the output of the ServiceNow request, if you remember, gave us that ticket information that now has to be used. So the output of that now has to be used as the input, as at least one variable as the input for this update of the ServiceNow, because we have to tell it which ticket we're updating. So that unique variable is something that we have to now pull out of the output of the first step. So before we can go any further, we have to have a way to manipulate that data. And that's exactly what a transformation is. So let me save this and let's go take a look at a transformation and how those work. So let me duplicate this and go over transformations. We have a transformation tab where we have a lot of pre-built, well, I'll say as a team, we've built these. We also do have a pre-built library that has transformations because one of the key components of transformations and features of them is that they are reusable. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I want to create a net new transformation because I want you to see exactly how powerful this is and how we can quickly build these things without having to write any code whatsoever. So I'm going to create a new transformation. I'm going to give it a name, ServiceNow 1. Okay, so now we've created this transformation and think of it as data coming in on the left-hand side, and incoming data, and then being able to manipulate, parse that data out, and then making it available on the right-hand side as an outgoing variable or an outgoing object of some sort. Let me simplify this for you. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create a schema. Now recall, let's see if I go back to our workflow here. We need the output of this call, this request, because it's going to identify the ID number of the ticket that it's created. So we need to be able to parse that out so that we can pass that into this ServiceNow request, this update ServiceNow request. So the easiest way to do that is we have to create an incoming schema which defines what incoming data to expect from that create ServiceNow ticket. So if I go into here and I create the schema, normally in order to create a schema, you would have to do it by hand. And that's a lot. That could be a lot of work, especially for a lot of data. One of the really great features that we have is if I look at the outgoing. So remember, this is my job manager and I can see the inputs and outputs of every single task that runs in a workflow from here. So I'm going to show you again from that create change request. We only passed one variable into it and we got this response back. I can copy this response and I can use it as a way to generate the schema for the data that we should be expecting from that call. So if I paste it here, this saves me a lot of time. And one of the things I don't need is I don't need one part of this called the result. So I'm just going to remove that. But the rest of this data is now going to be used to create the schema, which is just the definition of the data we should expect from the change request, that create change request. So if I click on infer schema here, it's going to take that data and say, okay, this is what I should now be expecting from that call. And all I need to do now is give it a name, and I tend to go give it a name that defines where it's from. So from create change request. I save that. We've created a schema or a definition of the data and the format that we expect to come from that first step in our workflow. So what is the one thing we need to extract from here? Let's see here. Oops. We need this particular, let me close this to make room. There we go. We need this particular ID because this is the new ID string. So how do we parse that out? It's very simple. I can click on its element, click on outgoing schema, and it's actually going to parse that data out one for one. And so out of all of that input that I got from the output from the create change request, I only want this one piece of information to pass to the update because that's what it requires. Now, if I save this and go back to my my workflow here, how do I implement this transformation? And I just add a new node here. I define it as a transformation, which I have defined here. I'm going to give it a new name. I'm going to call it format ServiceNow data. Because that's what it's doing. It's formatting the data that I got from the first ServiceNow create call into just the one piece of information I need to pass to the update. So I can save that. And now I just have to make a modification here. Oops, timed out. Let me reload. So now I just need to make a modification here. So my transformation, I need to define my transformation. Snow webinar 1. I think that's what we called it, correct? Oh, snow demo 1. Okay. Let me change that. Snow demo 1. Okay. Save that. So now we've defined this transformation to use that snow demo 1, which was what we created in our designer, our transformation designer. I have to tell this this transformation where to get its input from. So remember, we've created that schema so it knows what to expect the input to look like, but I have to tell it which task is outputting that information. And that's our first step, create ServiceNow change request. So the data coming out of that will come into the transformation. Because it's coming into the transformation, it's going to identify that ID variable, and now that can be used in our update change request. So if I click on that, I can take a look at the variables here. You can see that that change ID is required. I can statically define it, but we really can't because we don't know it in advance. We want to get it from that first task. So now I can select format ServiceNow data, which is that transformation task, and it's going to output the ID, which is exactly what we want. So it helps us to manipulate that data coming from the output of this and becomes the input of this. And we did it in a drag and drop way by manipulating schemas that came from our job information. So we really didn't have to write any code to do that. And now we're almost done. We could run this piece of it. There is one more variable here, right? So we still need a body, which is very similar to the first step. And in this case, recall that we wanted to go and change the update it to change the category to network. By default, the part of the default template is changes it to other. We want to change that as an update to network. So in order to do that, we just need to update this and statically define another object that's very similar to the one we did earlier for the first step. But in this case, we're gonna use category. We're going to pass this to the update task network. So I can save that. Now, one thing I do want to do here is I want to pause the workflow, because if this runs, it's going to run very quickly, and I want to show that it's creating it and the update's actually taking place. So one of the things that I can do within the workflow is I can insert another node, and I can put a manual task in. A manual task is one that literally requires manual human intervention, and this task is called view data. I will change the name, and I'm just going to call it pause, because this is going to pause the workflow, so that we'll create the ServiceNow request, we'll do the transformation, we'll pause so that we can see the ticket's been created, and then I'll have to work this manual task so that it can progress the workflow, so that it can do this last step which will do the update. And then we should expect to see the category change to network. So I'll do that within this particular task. I'm just going to fill out a few fields here. This is just filling out the window that it's going to bring up for us. Continue. All right. And I'll show you that in a minute. So we'll save that. Okay. So now we're going to create a new ticket. We're going to transform that data. So we extract the ID. We're going to have a quick pause here so we can take a look at the ticket before it's changed. We'll get through the pause, and then we'll see that the ticket gets updated using that new ticket key ID and to identify it. And then it's going to update it with a category called network instead of other. So let's run it. Go into our job manager so we can see this running. So it's going from the bottom up is the way it's working. So it starts the first step, create that ticket. So let's take a look at that data. Remember, we fed it a summary, new network change, and the outgoing information we got was that ID, which now our transformation is going to extract. But for us, we want to see that human readable ticket so we can pull it up. So it's 30266. And now it's sitting in a pause state. That's that view data. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's take a look at 30266. So let's look at our open tickets. Okay, here's the one that we just opened. We can see that the category is other, and the only thing that we set here is this new network change. So now let's go back into our job manager, and since we're paused, I can click on this work task. It's telling me we're paused. If I click continue, this will move the automation to the next step, and that next step is to update ServiceNow. Okay, so there was an error here, so let's take a look at it. This is always a good learning experience. So I passed category networking with the right ID. And then it says, let's see, status success, but it looked like something on ServiceNow was not happy with that. Let's take a look at the ticket itself. Okay, well, let's try to rerun it and see what happened here. Maybe this was a ServiceNow issue because it looked like it was successful. All right, so let's go back to our automation. Let's close that. We'll double check this one more time. The ID was right. Category network should have been updated. Adapter was correct. So that all looks good. Let's continue and run again. Okay, create ServiceNow. Let's take a look at that data. That request came in, new network change, created a new ticket, 30267. Let's go to our open tickets, 30267. Okay, so it did create. It's got category other. Let's see. When we work this task, we'll continue. Another error. Interesting. Okay, let me take a look. There might be one thing I need to do here. Let me try this again. If I go to transformation and do a reload on this, save it. Let's start again. Take a look. All right. 30268. There's our new ticket. Oops. We'll go back, work the task, move the automation forward. Interesting. Okay. Well, this is the high wire act that we live on. when we demo live. Interesting. So let me take another look at this. Not quite sure it's giving me an error. Why it's giving me an error. Okay. We can do this though. I do have another working demonstration here that is the fully built demonstration. And let's see if we can get that one going. Okay, so I'll walk you through this one because this one has a kind of a more built out. This is the open the ticket request. There we go. We're still doing the open the ticket or creating the ticket. We're doing the JSON form. We're formatting it. We are getting input from this one. So this is the fully built out. And let me run this as a demo and just make sure everything's running right if we don't have problems with our ServiceNow instance. But this is the fully built demonstration. But what I will point out before we run it is that we are still opening a ticket here. We are still doing a transformation. We're doing a ticket update. So that's where we stopped in our last step. And then here we're doing a close ticket at the very end. Now, the pieces that have been added to that have been around actually doing the network change. So here we've created a step to actually inflict the change on a network. And in this case, we're going to do creating a new network interface. But we're getting that data from a form. And so that was the next thing I was going to show you is from the form. But I want to run this to make sure we're not running any problems. This was with ServiceNow. This was something that I pre-built as the end state. So let's start that. And let's take a look at this job. And then I can kind of dissect it and show it to you. All right, so we've opened the ticket just like before. So we're sending the network change request as the summary. So that becomes the short description. On the outgoing side, we're seeing that the ticket gets created as 30269. And here's that ticket ID, that unique ticket ID. So let's take a look at 30269. All right, in ServiceNow, we have 30269. All right, it's been created, state new, category other, nothing else has changed other than the short description, which is the summary that we define, network change request. So now we are at another manual task that wants us to work this task because it's a form. So this includes the networking change that we wanted that I wanted to layer in later. But let's take a look at that right now. So this is a form that's going to ask us for the information in order to make a network change. So what is the information that's required in order to make a simple network change where we're creating a new loopback interface on a router? Well, we need to know either the IP address or the host name of the router. So we have that in a dropdown available. We need to know the description of the device. So in this case, we can just use something like test. We need to know the interface on the router. So in this case, the interface is loopback 301. I've already pre-filled it out in the form. We also need to know the IP address. What's the IP address we're going to put on on the interface? And then what's the net mask? So those are all things that are related to making the network change work. But at the end of this, I also have some other information that I want to update the ServiceNow ticket with. So for instance, in a ServiceNow ticket, there's a field where you define your test plan or a document that shows what the test plan is for this, and the implementation plan and the ServiceNow backout plan. So I want to update the ticket with those, but I want to allow a user using our platform to input those fields from this form. And so from this form, we get both information around how to make the network change, but also information that needs to be set into the ServiceNow ticket as an update. So when it gets created, there's really nothing populated. We're showing this form. This form's data is now going to be transformed into things that can be used for the network change task and the ServiceNow ticket update. So I'm going to click on confirm. And we did do it. It did go through and update the ticket. So that's good. And it's actually now pausing here. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at that ticket. So in the update ticket, we did some updates, obviously. That's why it's called an update ticket. But what did we update? So we passed to it some information in regards to what to update. So we're updating the summary. which is the short description. And I wanted it to update the summary with information that's actually relevant to the ticket. So remember, from the form, that's where we get that relevant network information. So from the form, we inputted the name of the device, right? Core ATL0. We inputted the loopback interface. We inputted the IP address. We inputted the net mask. We've now taken that information inside the transformation and turned it into a single string summary that includes all of that. And I'll show you that transformation in a minute. We've also implemented, we're updating the implementation plan, test plan, and backout plan that was also part of the form. And the category itself is now being updated as well. So it starts its life out as an other. We want to make sure that's categorized correctly as network. So if I close that, let's go back into our ticket, and our ticket automatically updated in the background where it's showing us here. The Itential workflow has modified this value. So this is where our update to the network was taking place. Our short description, which used to say new network change, now has been updated with truly relevant information on the change. And on top of that, now we've populated the fields for implementation plan, backout plan, and test plan as part of this as well. And so now all of that's been updated. We can go back to this workflow. And if I click work task, it's going to say, wait until approved in ServiceNow. When ServiceNow ticket is approved, click continue. So why is this? Let me show you something about the ServiceNow, how ServiceNow works, and especially around the state. So when a ticket is created, it's obviously given a new state. Remember earlier, I said you can right click on some of these and show choice list as a helpful tip, especially when you're writing automations in the platform with ServiceNow. If I go here, we can see that change request, this particular field, is what we're interested in, and the element is called state. And so the state has a value when it's new as -5. And the one thing about ServiceNow, it's very much process oriented. You have to follow the procedures in the process. So that means there is a sequence. And that sequence, if you look over here for change request states, starts at new, assess, authorize, scheduled, implement, review, and then can go to closed. So in order for us to close the ticket, we actually need to go through all of these steps. We can't go from new to closed. So we have to go through all of these steps. Now, in this particular automation, I want us to progress this manually to review, from new to review, and then we'll close the ticket out as a final step. But any of these, you can automate any of these if you have access in ServiceNow. Of course, ServiceNow is its own IT system with its own set of rules. So you're always going to have to adhere to those rules. But we have the opportunity within, the update change request ticket for ServiceNow to change the state to whatever state it needs to be. And of course, that just gives you flexibility in your automation. So in some cases, you can go from implement, and in the next session where we talk about ServiceNow, we can go from the new assess, authorize, schedule, and as soon as it hits implement, we can actually pull the ticket, the ticket in ServiceNow to see when it goes into an implement stage, and then immediately start automating running the automation from that point. Whereas by contrast here, I've created a manual step where you have to click to continue. So that's, again, we're starting from very, a very foundational understanding of how ServiceNow calls work and how to integrate them into a workflow. And then we're going to progress to a more advanced one. So let's go back to our ticket and let's just progress this manually. So from here, I can request approval. And if you're not familiar with what goes on the back end, this is basically it. So it goes to approver tab. At this point, we have a single level of approval that's required here. Once that's approved, it will move to the next state. So now we're at authorized, which also requires another approval. So one of these approvers must approve it. In that case, we'll go ahead and take that on. Now we've moved to the scheduled state. So at this point, you could schedule if a change needs to be done during a maintenance window, or if it's a change that can be done now, if it's non-destructive or in the lab or something like that. So if we click that, we click implement, we'll move us back scheduled into the implement stage. So now we're 2 stages away from closed, and from the implement stage, I can move us to review. And now we're exactly where we need to be for our automation to continue. So we put a message in here saying, hey, Wait till this is approved in ServiceNow, getting us to the review side, and then continue. And now that this is running, we're actually going to do the network script that's going to run. And remember, the input for this networking script, this is a Python script that's actually making a change on a network device. The input came from that form. And I'm going to show you how the transformation on that form has helped us pull that data out to be able to be used for this particular step. And then finally, we have this another manual step where we're reviewing data. And I put this in here so that we could see the data that was output from the step previously, this Python script. So even though it's a Python script running on a different system, we can actually capture every single piece of the output just like any other task. So one of the great things about our platform is if you have a networking team or any other team that's already invested in automations, whether they be Ansible playbooks or Python scripts. In this case, we're leveraging like a NetMiko library in Python to do some CLI-driven automation just in the Python script. In this case, just to create an interface. When we integrate that into the system, all of the output that's available for that is still available within our platform, and we can use that in a transformation to determine success or failure, to create fallout scenarios. So if there's a failure in an automation, we can fall out and recover, those kind of things. So all of that is still available. So this last pause right here before we close the ticket out was just to show that this was completed, to verify that the change was made and that there was a success here, and it actually made the change according to the data in our that we fed it into our form. And we can actually see the commands that were executed on the device itself. And so if I click go here, it will move forward the automation until we have the close ticket. So if I go back here, we see the state has been updated. But if I reload it, it goes into closed. And so that finishes everything out. So let me dissect this, since we had to go another way with this. Let me dissect this a little bit for you. So when we first started, we opened a ticket. And in that ticket, we defined a single variable network change request. When we wanted to update the ticket, and we updated the ticket to change the category to network. And then what we're trying to do, we kind of got stuck there, but what we're trying to do is close the ticket. So let me show you what the close ticket looks like. The close ticket variable, we're defining as, and this is accessible through the ServiceNow API to understand that state 3 is equal to close. So we're passing that to the update change request for that particular ticket ID and saying, hey, it needs to be closed. And not only that, we're updating 2 other fields. If I look at the ticket itself, we're updating the close code and the close notes. And again, if we right click, show choice list, we'll see that we can update these with successful in other states here. And that's exactly what we're doing. So in our automation in that step, we're updating the close code, the close notes, so that we can close it out successful. Now let's take a look at something else here that's pretty interesting. When we take a look at the form itself, that becomes the input for our transformation. So our transformation actually is a little more complicated than where we started at a little bit earlier. So if I look under details, this transformation is called Snow Get ID. So let me open that one up and walk you through it. Okay. Let me close some things down to make it a little more straightforward. So remember when we created our first transformation earlier, we took the output from the first create change request task, and really all we needed to do was extract that ID. Because when we go to update it, whether it's updating some of the fields or updating it to close it out, we still need to reference that ID. And that only place that ID exists is as the output of the change request. So we created the schema using the output without writing any code. And now we can extract that one for one and make that available to the other change request updates. So let me minimize that. Now we added something else to this. Remember, we created a form. That form asked us for data when it popped up. And actually, it'd probably be helpful to look at it. So let's go to Automation Studio. Let's take a look at the form. Let's see. What was this form called? JSON form was called Snow Form Demo 1. Okay. So let's go here. Let's go JSON forms. There it is. So let's take a look at this form. So when we create a form, it's really a drag and drop set of elements. We created this by dragging this over here, defining these fields, these labels. For a dropdown, I can define everything in the dropdown, or it can be dynamically through an API call populated. But essentially, I created all the fields that we needed. So these first 5 fields are required in order to make a network change. So those get passed to the network change Python script. But then I also added fields so we could update the ServiceNow ticket with test plan, implementation plan, and backup plan. So when this form gets created and shown, we create it here, but actually I can do a preview of it inside of the form creator. And if I populate all of the fields, I can show this form data. Now, this form data is the JSON object that I can copy to the clipboard, very similar to what we did with the JSON information that came from the create change request ServiceNow, where we created this input schema. And that's how I created this schema. This schema was literally created from this form data information by pasting it in here and hitting infer from schema, and it created this for me. So now that that form data is created, I have access to all of these variables. And now I need to pass these variables into the different tasks that need to utilize them. So the first thing I did was I mapped the core router, loopback interface, IP address, and net mask, and description to individual variables that now get used by the Python script. So let me show you that. So if I go to the Python script and we look at the variables that it expects, it needs a host name, it needs an interface name, it needs a description, an IP address, and a net mask. And that data now comes from our transformation task, which is called format snow and form data. And that's exactly what this is doing when we design this transformation. So now I can one for one pull that data out and make it available in individual variables to be used in the network change task. But beyond that, one of the real strengths of the transformation also is to be able not just to do a one-for-one mapping, but to actually do data manipulation, and not just one stage of data manipulation, but multiple stages of data manipulation inside the transformation itself. So in a single task, automation task, you can manipulate data for a number of tasks subsequent to it in the right format that it requires in order to do its job to run the task successfully. So what I did here is I wanted to pass some information to the ServiceNow update tasks, right? And in order to do that, I needed to define summary, implementation plan, test plan, backup plan, and category. This is what we had defined earlier. But now I'm doing it inside this transformation. Now, where does that data come from? Well, the summary data is the thing I wanted to really be a valuable piece of information. So the summary data is the short description here. And I wanted it to actually have the information that was input from the form here, but I wanted to put it in such a way that's relevant and useful in a human readable format. So this is what a template literal does. So we have this palette of different functions here that can be used as drag and drop elements inside this to manipulate data or to format data in any way we want to. So in this case, let me show you what a template literal does. I can define a series of variables, core router. Now they're defined by this $sign and inside curly braces. Oops, I don't want to do that. I can define these variables and then I can implement them in a human readable sentence. So on this core router name, a new interface is created on this interface with this IP address and this net mask. And so once I've defined that, it defines these variables, and then I just map them from the form right into what they are, and then it uses these variables to populate that template to make the human readable sentence, so that can be fed into the summary that updates the ServiceNow ticket, which gives us this nice human readable description. So the summary description is mapped to the short description here, and that's where that came from. That's the power of the transformation. Now, in addition to that, We did a one-to-one mapping for the other things that were part of the form. And then finally, the category needs to be a string called network because we're defining from other to the category network. And I can create basically a static entry by using this function called new string, and it just defines a new string. This could easily be other or something else. I can define it, but it needs to be network in order to be correct for the type of category. And so that's what we've done there. So again, this is another function that's part of many different operations and methods that can be used to manipulate data in a single step. So if you think about it, when we look back at this, what we've done is we've opened a ticket, we've extracted the ID of the new ticket, we've asked the user to generate input that is relevant not only to the task here in order to make the network change this new interface, but also to update the ServiceNow ticket. And in order to format all that data together, it's fed into a transformation we're using a designer here where we can manipulate the data exactly as it needs to be for any subsequent tasks following up. So what's the first subsequent task? Update the uh, the ticket. We're passing it the ID, which is the ticket ID that came from the create. And then here's the body. That body is actually referencing our transformation, and this variable now becomes to snow update. This is what's being passed to it. And that all that data is being mapped from our input back into our output, manipulated here into a nice, clean summary description, and then used and then referenced from a task and not statically defined. The next thing that gets done here is when we go to the network change, we're using a Python script. It requires all of this data. Where does that data come from? It does come from the form ultimately, but it runs through a transformation to put it in the format that this needs in order to run. And that format is individual variables. So host, we're referencing our transformation task and the very specific core router variable, that's our host that maps to that. And we did all of these features and functions within a single transformation, and integrating ServiceNow and a form data into all of that, which allows us to now create an end-to-end automation that not only opens a ticket, updates a ticket, closes a ticket, transforms the data, allows us to get input from a form, but the form could be another source of truth. I like to think of this as basically we've just created two sources of truth. The source of truth is the open CR ticket, step one. The second source of truth is the JSON form, which is asking a user for data, and then making the transformation say, let's manipulate that data in a single step to feed to all of the other steps that require that data. And then from that, we close out the ticket and show that the integration is complete. All right. I know we're at the end of the hour here. I want to thank everybody. I appreciate everybody's patience. Hopefully they saw that we have the ability to not only implement and integrate these things very, very quickly right from the very beginning using a JSON open API schema, integrating, making all of those ServiceNow tasks around change management request tickets available inside of our platform. And then finally being able to very, very quickly build simple integrations, opening a ticket, updating a ticket, closing a ticket. Even those simple integrations save network engineers a lot of time because they're swivel chairing, they're copying and pasting between dashboards. So even in this most simple step, being able to integrate these with the change itself and then seeing the flexibility of transformations hopefully gives you an idea of how quickly you can get up to speed doing the integrations, how much time it's going to save. And not only that, tune in later for more advanced things where we can actually take out some of these manual tasks and even automate those things so that we know the state of a ticket going forward. And then how to share some of these automations out, how to start them not from a form within our platform, but even start them from a catalog entry into ServiceNow. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their patience and their time today, and I will catch you guys later.